The measuring rule was still in Mercy Winslow's hand when she said the words that would either save her or hang her, and afterward she could never decide which fear had made her louder. She had knelt at the great bed with the brass rule laid along the Duke's shin, counting off the inches the way her father had taught her to count them, quick and quiet, so the family would not have to hear the arithmetic of their own grief. 4 feet 10, and a hand for the length. A hand's breadth, and 2 fingers for the shoulders, wasted as they were. She had done it 100 times in the parish in cottages that smelled of tallow and turned milk, and she had learned to breathe through her mouth so the smells would not follow her home. But this time she breathed through her nose, because a corpse handler's first lesson is that the nose knows a thing the eyes will argue with, and what her nose told her stopped the rule against the bedpost, and stopped her heart a half-beat with it. Garlic. Not the kitchen kind, not the honest reek of a servant's supper carried up on an apron. This was the other garlic, the false one, the smell that rose off a body when a certain white powder had been going into it a long time. The smell her father used to name in the low churchyard voice he saved for the graves he did not like to open. And under the garlic, in the skin itself, that particular waxy pallor, too even, too kept, the look of a thing that had begun to be preserved before it was quite dead. She sat back on her heels. Around her the room was arranging itself to be sad in the proper order. Dr. Ivo Culpepper stood at the window with his hands folded on his belly like a man who had said his prayers and found them answered. By the door, Mrs. Tilbrook, the housekeeper, drew the household keys in against her skirts to hush them, and a footman shifted his weight from boot to boot behind a candle nobody needed, for the November afternoon still came grey through the tall glass. They were all of them ranging themselves around the dying of the Duke of Corvinwood as around a hearth, and Mercy Winslow, who had been fetched from the parish workhouse that morning in a cart, whose father was 3 weeks in the frozen ground, and whose name in the county was a byword for the ugly end of a spade, understood that she was the least person in the room and about to make herself the loudest. "He isn't dying," she said. "He's being poisoned." The candle flame did not so much as bow. Then everything came at once, the way water comes when the plank is pulled. The doctor turned from the window with an expression of tender astonishment. The footman's mouth fell into an O, and Mrs. Tilbrook drew a breath through her nose that was its own kind of measuring. And from the bed, from the grey ruin of the man they had all come to bury on the instalment plan, there came a sound Mercy had not expected. A dry sound. Almost, she would think later, a laugh. "There now," said Dr. Culpepper warmly, coming toward her with his hands still folded. "There now, child. Grief is a strange horse. It will throw the steadiest rider." He said it to the room and not to her, which is how a certain kind of man says a thing he means to be believed. This poor creature buried her father not a month past, a sexton gentleman of unhappy repute, and now she is set before another deathbed, and her mind, quite naturally, looks for a villain to blame it on. It is kinder than the truth, which is that men wither and God calls them. Take the rule from her, Walter. Gently. Mercy did not give up the rule. She was on her feet without knowing she had risen, and she was looking not at the doctor, who wanted her to look at him, but at the tray on the little table by the bed. On the tray stood a glass with a finger of amber tonic left in the bottom, and a spoon, and a folded paper of the kind that powders come wrapped in. "Smell it," she said. "The draught. Smell the dregs on a hot coal and tell me it is medicine." "I shall smell nothing of the kind," said the doctor, "and neither shall you, for you are leaving. Mrs. Tilbrook." "Mrs. Tilbrook," said the Duke from the bed, "is going to leave the girl exactly where she is." It is a peculiar thing to watch a room resort itself around a whisper. The Duke of Corvinwood had not been expected to speak. He had been, by every account, carried down to the workhouse in the fetching cart, past speaking, past knowing, a lamp with the oil nearly gone. But he had turned his head on the bolster, and his eyes, sunk though they were in the bruised sockets of the long sick, had come open and were clear, and they were resting on Mercy with an attention that was neither grief nor fever, but something older and drier, and more dangerous to the doctor than either. "You," he said to her, "you are the gravedigger's daughter, Winslow's girl. They brought you to measure me." "Yes, your grace." How very unfashionable of them. His mouth moved. It cost him. She could see it cost him, the way a laugh costs a man with a knife somewhere in him. "And you have measured me and found me." What was the word? Poisoned. "I have measured you and found you not yet dead," said Mercy, "which is a different thing than they have been telling you." The doctor laughed, a smooth, full laugh with no knife in it at all. "Your grace, I must protest. This is beyond—" "Evo." The Duke did not raise his voice. He had no voice to raise, but he said the name and let it lie there, and the doctor's laugh folded itself away like a fan. "You have told me for 6 weeks that I am dying. You will forgive a dying man a whim. I have a fancy to be measured slowly." He closed his eyes. "Mrs. Tilbrook, put the gravedigger's daughter somewhere I can find her, and tonight, not now, tonight, send her up." That was how Mercy Winslow came to be locked, for her own protection, in a servant's garret under the cold slates of Corvinwood, and how, at an hour when the house had given up the last of its noises, she came to be standing in the Duke's chamber again with a stub of candle in her fist, listening to a man decide whether to trust her with his life. They locked her in, of course. That is the shape of these things, and Mercy knew the shape. A woman who says a great house is murdering its master is not thanked. She is put behind a door where her voice will not carry, and the word ghoul is set outside the door to keep her company. She had heard it through the wood as they turned the key. One of the maids, frightened, saying it low, "Ghoul, gravedigger's ghoul, come to feed on him," and she had sat on the edge of the cot and let it settle onto her with all the other names her father's trade had earned her. It is a word that sticks. It stuck to her father living, and it did not fall off him dead. It would stick to her now, and she knew it, and she had said her piece anyway, and she was not sure, sitting in the dark with her knees drawn up, whether that made her brave or merely her father's daughter, which in the county's arithmetic was the same low sum. She thought of the cottage that had gone with the office, and the office that had gone into the ground with him. She thought of the bailiff's face, not unkind, telling her the parish would take her because there was nowhere else that would, and of the great house's steward coming for her a fortnight later with a coin in his glove and a use for her hands. She had not asked what the use was. One did not, when one was the last Winslow and worth exactly the price of a coffin's labour. Now she knew the use, and the use had gone wrong in the doing of it, and she sat and waited to see whether being right was going to cost her more than being wrong ever had. She was still awake when Mrs. Tilbrook came for her. The housekeeper carried no candle and made no noise. She opened the door and stood in it, a tall shape smelling of lavender and starch, and she looked at Mercy for a long moment with the particular measuring that Mercy was beginning to understand was this house's native tongue. "You will come with me," said Mrs. Tilbrook, "and you will say nothing on the stairs, and you will understand that I do not believe you. I'm fetching you because he asks it, and I have not in 30 years refused that man a thing he asked with his own mouth. That is all this is." A pause. "You will keep your hands where I can see them near his person." "My hands are the least of what could hurt him in this house," said Mercy, and went. The Duke was propped higher on the bolsters now, and the great bed with its carved post made him look smaller, a coin left in a chest too grand for it. But the eyes were still clear. A single candle burned. He watched her cross the room the way a man watches a horse he has heard is either a bargain or a bolter. "Sit," he said, "there, where I can see your face and you cannot reach the tray." When she had sat, "Now, you will tell me what you smelled, and you will tell me as if I were a clever man and not a sick one, for I am much more offended by being lied to gently than by being told a hard thing plainly." So Mercy told him plainly. She told him about the false garlic and the true, and about the skin that had begun to keep itself. She told him about her father, who had opened more graves than any man in 3 parishes, and had learned over 30 years of the cold work, which corpses rotted honest, and which lay too fresh and too fair in the ground. And why? There was a farmer, she said, over Ackley Way, that his wife swore he died of a wasting, and he was 3 months buried when the family fell to quarrelling over the land, and would have him up again. And my father brought him up, and the man was as fair in the box as the day they put him down, your grace. And my father closed the lid and washed his hands a long time, and said to me after, Lo, Mercy, remember it. When the ground gives a man back too kind, it is because something else has been keeping him. The dead should stink. It is when they will not stink that you should be afraid. She looked at the Duke. You will not stink, your grace. Forgive me. When they bury you next week, you will lie in that vault as fair as the farmer of Ackley, and everyone will say what a peaceful end, and the truth of you will keep down there in the cold, keeping, for years, until somebody has cause to look. I have smelled it on the dead a dozen times. This afternoon I smelled it on the living. That is all. That is the whole of what I know, and I know it the way I know my own name. The Duke was quiet for a while. Somewhere below, a clock let out the half-hour in a thin, far voice. Arsenic, he said at last, not a question. My father called it rat's bane, mostly, and the white powder. But the gentry's word is arsenic, yes. It goes in slow. A little in the physic, a little in the broth, and a man wastes and coughs, and his belly cramps, and his hands go to pins, and everyone who loves him watches him die by inches of a natural decline. It is the patientest murder there is. You do not need strength for it. You do not need to be in the room when it works. You only need to be trusted with what the man eats and drinks day on day, and to have the nerve to keep pouring. To be trusted, said the Duke slowly, with what I eat and drink. Yes. Day on day. Yes. He turned his head and looked at the tray, at the glass with its finger of amber gone to sludge, at the folded paper. Dr. Culpepper, he said, has attended this family since before I could walk. He physicked my father into the vault 6 winters ago, and wept at the graveside, which I remember because I had never seen him weep. He has sat in that chair 4 hours a day for 6 weeks, and fed me from that glass with his own hand, and told me I was going, and told me kindly, and I have believed him kindly. His voice did not change, but something behind it moved, a slow, subterranean shift like a slate settling in a wall. You understand what you are asking me to believe. You are asking me to believe that the man who buried my father has spent this autumn burying me, and that he began, if your farmer of Ackley means anything, a great while before this autumn. I am not asking you to believe anything tonight, said Mercy. I am asking you to stop drinking out of that glass. Belief can take its time, your belly cannot. And there, in the candle dark, the Duke of Corvinwood laughed his second dry laugh of the day, the knife in it and all, and said the thing that made Mercy Winslow, for the first time since her father's spade had rung on the frozen churchyard clay, and a stranger had told her the cottage was no longer hers, feel the floor of the world come up solid under her feet again. "Give me the sick room," he said. "All of it. The food, the drink, the physic, the key. You will taste nothing I do not first watch you draw from the common pot, and I will trust you not because I believe you, but because a man who is being poisoned has nothing to lose by handing the cup to the one person in his house accused of wanting it. It is very good logic. It is nearly the only logic I have left." He closed his eyes. "Mrs. Tilbrook will hate it. Do it anyway. And girl, your grace, we will keep this between the three of us in this room. You will make no accusation you cannot yet prove, and neither will I, for the surest way to be poisoned faster is to let the poisoner see you have stopped swallowing. Do you take my meaning?" "I take it exactly," said Mercy. "You want to seem to be dying while you mend. That is a thing the dead do very well, and the living find hard. I will teach you." "There," said the Duke, and the ghost of the knife laugh again. "You see how useful you are already. Go to bed. You begin in the morning, and you begin by looking sorry for me." She did not begin gently, but she did begin quietly, which the Duke had asked of her, and which suited the trade she came from, for the churchyard teaches a person to do the largest things without noise. Mercy had learned in the parish that a household will forgive you anything sooner than presumption, and that the surest way to be tolerated is to be useful before you are noticed, so she made herself useful and let the noticing come after. She took the tonic glass first. In the grey of the next morning, before the doctor's carriage was on the drive, she carried the dregs down to the still-room fire, raked out a coal red as a cherry, and let a drop of the amber sludge fall on it. The smoke went up thin and blue, and it carried the smell, the whole shameless truth of it, the false garlic blooming into the cold room, and Mrs. Tilbrook, who had followed her down with her arms folded and her mouth set to disbelieve, stood very still over the coal and did not say ghoul. She did not say anything. She looked at the smoke, and then she looked at Mercy, and her mouth, which had been set, unset itself by 1 degree, and she said, "Do it again." Mercy did it again. The same blue smoke, the same reek. "That is garlic," said Mrs. Tilbrook, "and there is no garlic in a tonic." "No," said Mercy, "there is not." The housekeeper was silent a moment. "My mother," she said, "kept house for the old Duke, and I under her, and I have poured that man's physic and this man's physic for 40 years, and I have never once smelled that over a coal, because I never once thought to. It is a small thing to raise a coal to a glass. It is a small thing, and I never did it, and I have been in this house since before either of these dukes could stand." Her jaw worked. "I do not like you. I want that understood. But I have buried enough of this family, and I will not be made a fool at the graveside of the last of it because I was too proud to smell a coal. You will show me. Everything you do to him, you will show me first, and if ever I catch you in a lie, you will wish the parish had kept you. Are we agreed?" "We are agreed," said Mercy, and something in her chest that had been clenched since the churchyard let go a single notch. She won the rest of them with the stable boy, though she did not plan it, and would not afterward take credit for a mercy she would have shown a stray dog. Tom Reed was 12, red-headed, and had got his right hand caught between a shine cob and a loose-hung gate, and by the time they thought to fetch anyone, the hand had swelled black to the wrist, and the smell coming off it was the smell Mercy knew better than any smell alive, the sweet rot smell that means the ground is already reaching up for a man. The head groom wanted to send for Dr. Culpepper, who was 3 hours off in the town. The boy's mother, a laundry maid named Peg, was on her knees in the straw with her apron in her mouth, and Mercy Winslow, who had dressed more festering wounds than the county physician had ever troubled to look at, because the poor of the parish came to the sexton's cottage when they could not pay a doctor's fee, rolled up her sleeves and asked for honey and clean lint, and a shut room, and the boy's trust for the length of an hour. She got the honey and the lint, the trust she had to earn in front of them, and she earned it the only way she knew, which was to be entirely without fear over a thing that frightened everyone else, so that her steadiness ran into the boy through her hands, the way warmth runs into cold water. She cleaned the hand, she showed the head groom the black flesh and the sound flesh, and where the line ran between them, and she laid the maggots to the black the way her father had taught her, for the churchyard teaches you that what feeds on the dead can be set, carefully, to save the living, eating only the rot and sparing the quick. And though Peg cried out at the sight of them, Mercy said, without looking up, "They are cleaner than a knife, and they do not slip, and your boy will keep his fingers by them, which he will not by prayer, though you may pray as well if it steadies you." She bound the hand in honey and lint, and she changed the binding 3 times a day for 8 days, and she slept those nights in the straw when the sick room did not need her, and on the 9th day Tom Reed wiggled 4 black-nailed fingers at his weeping mother, and the household of Corvinwood, which had called Mercy a ghoul through a locked door, decided among itself, in the wordless way households decide things, that the gravedigger's daughter was theirs. Peg would have washed her feet. The head groom, who did not say much, took to leaving the best of the stable's small comforts where Mercy would find them, a warmer blanket, amended pattens, and once, wordless, a posy of the last chrysanthemums off the frosted border, which is as near to a love letter as a head groom comes. It was the Duke himself who told her, on the night after Tom Reed kept his fingers, that he had been helping her longer than she knew, and it was the longest they had yet spoken, and it was the beginning of the thing between them that neither would name for weeks. She had come to bank the fire and found him awake, watching her, and he said, without preamble, in the flat, dry voice he used for the things that mattered most, "I have been pouring it in the fire." She stopped with the poker in her hand. "The draught," he said, "this last fortnight before you came. I could not have told you why. A man does not decide all at once that the whole world he was born into means to murder him. The mind will not take it in one swallow any more than the belly will. But I would take the glass in my hand of an evening, and Ivo would sit there so satisfied, so tenderly satisfied, watching me drink my own death and calling it my strength, and some animal thing in me, something older than my reason and a good deal quicker, would wait until he looked to the fire, and I would tip half the glass after his glance and drink the rest with my eyes shut. I told myself it was the taste. I told myself I was only tired of the taste, which was true, for it has a taste, did you know? A sweetness under the bitter, a sweetness that has no business being there. Sweetness in the wrong place, said Mercy quietly, is the taste of something being hidden. My father said it of a great many things besides poison. Did he? The Duke looked at her a while. I was saving my own life a spoonful at a time and calling it a distaste for medicine. Is that not a fine thing? Is that not a fine thing to know about oneself, that the wit one has dined out on for 30 years was, at the 1 hour it was needed, too slow by half, and that it was the beast in me and not the gentleman that kept me breathing? He shifted on the bolster. Feed me, Winslow. Feed me and dose me and let no man near the tray but you and the woman who hates you. But do it, still, behind the smile. Ivo comes tomorrow. He will find me sinking, because you and I will show him a sinking man, and he will go home content, and content is the only thing that will keep his hand from growing bolder. I find I have a great and unfashionable appetite to live, and I mean to be very cowardly about it, and I will need you to be brave enough for the both of us in front of company. I have been brave in front of worse company than a doctor, said Mercy. I have laid out men who owed my father money and smiled at the widows. Have you? He was almost smiling himself now, the grey face doing something it had forgotten how to do. You are a hard woman, Mercy Winslow. I am a useful one, she said. It is what is left when the parish has had the rest. And she banked the fire and left him, and neither of them said the other thing that was in the room, which was that a man and a woman who keep a secret together at midnight have begun, whatever else they are about, to belong to one another. The doctor was not a fool, and a poisoner reads a returning colour the way a farmer reads a cloud, and the harder Mercy and the Duke worked to hide the mending, the more the mending insisted on being seen. Culpeper came on the 4th day of December, and he sat his 4 hours, and he took the Duke's wrist between two soft fingers and frowned at what the pulse told him, which was that his patient, against every tender prediction, was not sinking as fast as a sinking man should. Mercy stood at the foot of the bed where the Duke had told her to stand, and watched the doctor's face do the smooth work of hiding a calculation. He asked gently whether his Grace had been taking his draught. He had, said the Duke greyly, every drop, and God knew it did him no good. That was the wasting speaking, said the doctor. The wasting made men fanciful. But he had brought, he said, a stronger physic, a bracing one, for the decline had reached a delicate pass, and the constitution wanted carrying over the worst of it. He would make it double for a few nights. He measured the powder himself, into the amber, with his back half to the room, and he stirred it with the little spoon, and he held it out with his own hand as he had held it out 100 nights. And here was the whole difficulty of the thing they were doing, the trap inside their own cleverness. For Mercy could no more strike the glass from the doctor's hand than she could have flown, not with the whole game resting on the doctor believing himself unwatched. To refuse the family physician to his face was to declare everything, and to declare everything with nothing yet in her hand but a smell, and a boy's saved fingers was to hang. She looked at the Duke. The Duke looked at the glass, and she watched him understand, as she understood, that the only safe thing was the deadly thing, that he must drink, that a sinking man drinks what his doctor gives him, and that to keep the long game they must lose this single hand. He drank. He did not drink it all. He was clever. He spilt what he dared onto the counterpane, and let his weak grip excuse it. But he drank enough, more than enough, and Culpeper watched him do it, with the tender satisfaction of a man watering a plant, and went home content, exactly as content as the Duke had wished him, and it was the worst night of Mercy's life to that hour. It came on at 2 by the far clock. The double dose rose up in him and doubled him, and Mercy woke to Mrs. Tilbrook's hand hard on her shoulder, and came to the chamber to find the Duke gripped in cramps worse than she had yet seen, sweating, retching, his hands drawn up like a bird's feet, his eyes rolled to the whites. There was no keeping the game now. The game was over. The only thing left was the man. She sent Mrs. Tilbrook for milk and charcoal and clean water off the boil in a basin, and when a frightened footman came to the door to say he had sent a boy galloping for the doctor, she took the man by the front of his coat and told him, in the flat voice that had no fear left in it because it was too busy, that if Dr. Culpeper came within 3 rooms of this door before she opened it herself, she would lay the death of the Duke of Corvinwood at his own 2 feet before the magistrate. And did he understand her? And he did. She nursed him 3 days. She gave him milk to sheathe the belly and charcoal to bind the poison and clean water, endless clean water, to carry it out of him, and she let nothing else past his lips, nothing she had not drawn and tasted, and Mrs. Tilbrook sat the far side of the bed with the doctor barred beyond the door, turning him away twice at the top of the stair with the whole weight of her 40 years, and between them the 2 women pulled the Duke of Corvinwood back up out of the ground by the collar. The first day he did not know them. The second day he knew them and wished he did not, for the cramps were a cruel low tide going out. On the third night, his fever broke, and in the small hours he woke clear-eyed and found Mercy asleep in the chair with her hand fallen open on the counterpane, and when she woke it was to his fingers resting light on her wrist, taking her pulse gravely, the way the doctor took his, and his dry voice saying, "Steady, a good strong steady pulse. You will live, Winslow. I have decided to allow it." And then, after a silence, not dry at all, he very nearly had me, on my own consent in front of you, because I was too proud of our clever game to spill the whole glass. I will not drink another thing in this house that has passed through his hands, or any hand but yours. I have finished being reasonable about it. There is a point past which being reasonable is only another word for being got at slowly, and I have gone past it, tonight, in that basin. He closed his eyes. The game is done. From tomorrow I am openly your patient, and openly nobody else's, and if the county thinks it strange that a duke should be nursed by a gravedigger's daughter, the county may come and smell my father's coffin, and we will see who is strange. He did not say that last aloud to anyone but her then, but it lodged in Mercy like a seed in a crack, and it would come up months later in a cold vault and split the case wide. They should have been safe after that, or safer, for the doctor was barred and the duke was mending in earnest now, the ugly blotched colour of the poisoned giving way by inches to an honest thinness that ate and slept and grumbled. But safety in a great house is a rumour, and the rumour ended on the 20th of December when Reeve Hulbrook came home. He came on a bright hard afternoon with 2 horses and a servant and a great deal of noise, and the house lit up around him the way a house lights up around a favourite. Reeve was the duke's half-brother, younger by 9 years, handsomer in the easy way that cost nothing, and he came up the stairs 3 at a time and into the sick room with his arms already open and his face already wet, crying his brother's name, falling on the bed, gripping the duke's thin hands and pressing them to his own cheek and saying over and over that he had come the moment the letters found him, that he had ridden day and night from the coast, that he simply could not have borne to come too late, and the duke, who had spent 6 weeks being murdered by a man who loved him tenderly, held his brother's head against his breast and stroked his hair and said, "Hush, Reeve, hush, as you see. I'm too troublesome to die." And Mercy stood at the window and watched Reeve Hulbrook weep into his brother's nightshirt, and watched over the shaking of his shoulders his eyes come open and travel the room and find her, and rest on her, dry and quick and cold as a coin laid on a dead man's lid, before the weeping closed over them again. It was one look. It was gone in an instant, folded back under the grief so smoothly that she could have told herself she imagined it, and for a good many days she tried to. That was the trouble with Reeve, and it was, she would come to see, exactly the trouble he intended to be. His grief was so warm and so wet and so unstinting that a person watching him wanted to be ashamed of any colder thought. He sat by his brother's bed for hours. He read to him. He wept, easily and often, and let himself be seen to weep, and once Mercy came upon him in the gallery with his hand pressed flat to the old duke's portrait and his shoulders going, and she stood in the doorway unseen and thought against her own instinct, he loved his father too. Perhaps I have measured him wrong. Perhaps the doctor did this for his own gain, and I have hung a good man in my mind on the strength of one look across a sick bed. And that thought, which she could not quite kill and could not quite trust, was the most dangerous thing Reeve Hulbrook had brought into the house, for a woman who doubts her own certainty stops gathering proof at exactly the hour she needs it most. He was charming to her. That was the worst of it, the thing she could not carry to the duke, because there was nothing in it a besotted brother would credit. He thanked her, publicly, extravagantly, for saving his beloved sterling. He pressed a coin on her that she did not take, and 2 evenings before Christmas he found her alone on the gallery stair, and he leaned on the rail beside her and looked out over the cold hall with his handsome grieving face, and he said kindly, so kindly, "I must tell you something, Mercy, because no one else will have the heart, and you should not walk into it blind. They talk of you, in the county. Oh, not unkindly, but they talk." A sigh. "Your father, Winslow the sexton. They say, I only repeat it, you understand, I do not credit a word. They say he did more in the churchyard than dig, that he sold what he dug up, that the surgeons in the town paid him by the corpse, and that he had a way with the fresh buried, a way of keeping them fresh with powders for the journey down to the anatomists. Resurrectionist, they call it. Body snatcher. And they say, the kindest voice in the world, that such a trade is a thing that runs in a blood, that a girl who was raised to keep the dead too fresh might, put to it, keep the living too still. It is monstrous. I said so. I said, the girl saved my brother's life. But you know how a name sticks in a county, Mercy. It sticks first and hardest to whoever is nearest a grave when the ground opens. I only wished you to be armed." "That is very thoughtful of you," said Mercy Winslow, in the flat voice, "to arm me against a rumour by carrying it up the stairs yourself." She held his eyes when she said it, and for one instant the grief slipped, and she saw the cold coin under it again, plain and unmistakable, and the days of doubt fell off her like a coat, and she was ashamed she had ever put it on. Then he laughed, warm and rueful, and said what a plain-spoken creature she was, and how he liked her for it, and went down the stairs whistling, and Mercy stood on the cold gallery and understood 2 things at once, that the warmest man in the house had just, twice now, in the space of a heartbeat, taken her length for a box, and that she had very nearly let him talk her out of her own eyes, which was the cleverer of his two crimes and the one that had come nearest to killing her. She went, that same night, to the loft over the stable where they had let her stow the last of her father's things, the sexton's kit, the tools she had not been able to sell or bear to, the flat tin trunk with its churchyard smell, and she knelt over it with a lantern and went through it piece by piece, and found what she had known, cold in her belly on the stair, that she would find. Her father's tin of ratsbane was gone, the little Japan tin, stamped on the lid in the letters the ironmonger had punched for him 30 years back, J. Thorne, Sexton, for her father had bought the tin second-hand off old Thorne the sexton before him, and never troubled to have it restruck. Ratsbane, being a churchyard tool as honest as a spade, kept to put down the rats that gnawed the coffin boards. The tin her father had kept in the corner of the trunk her whole life was not in the corner of the trunk. She knelt in the lantern light with the lid up and the churchyard smell in her throat, and understood that somewhere in this house a small, deadly tin with a dead man's name on it was waiting, patiently, in a careful hand, for the hour it would be needed against her. She should have gone to the Duke that night and told him all of it, and she has been asked since, she asked herself, that long winter, lying awake, why she did not. And the answer was the answer of a woman who had watched a name stick to her father living and dead. What did she have? She had a smell over a coal and a returning colour, and a farmer of Ackley 3 parishes off, and a boy's saved fingers, and a missing tin she could not prove had ever existed, but by her own word, and a look across a sick bed that no court would hear of. Against them she had a father called Resurrectionist, by 3 magistrates' wives who would repeat it, and her own 2 hands that everyone agreed knew far too much about keeping the dead too fresh, and the plain black fact that for 6 weeks she alone had drawn and carried every mouthful the Duke had swallowed. If she cried thief and poison and murder now, with the tin gone and no proof of who had taken it, she would be crying it in her own voice, the ghoul's voice, the bought girl's voice, and it would stick, as Reeve had promised her so kindly it would stick, first and hardest to whoever stood nearest the grave. It sticks first to whoever says it first. She needed the tin found in the taker's hand, not merely missing from hers. She needed the doctor's own powder in the doctor's own purchase, and a proof that did not come out of her mouth. Until she had it, her certainty was a rope, and the free end of it was fitted to her own neck, and she would not put her head in it and hand the drop to Reeve Halbrook as a Christmas gift. So she said nothing, and gathered and watched, and kept her father's empty trunk locked, and told no one it was empty, and told herself it was sense and not cowardice, and did not entirely convince herself. And this, the withholding, the long dangerous patience of it, was the thing that would nearly cost her everything, and the thing she would never, given it again, do differently. What she gave the Duke instead of her fear was her whole self, which surprised her more than it surprised him. He had, by then, begun to do a thing he had not done in 30 years, which was to look forward to an hour. He was aware of it, as a man is aware of a change in his own weather. In the mornings now he found himself listening for her step on the stair, which was quick and even and unlike any other step in the house, servant or gentle. The servants hurried and the gentle strolled, and Mercy Winslow walked as if she were carrying something level and did not mean to spill it, which, he supposed, all her life she had been. He had made his peace with dying a long while before the poison, if he were honest, before he had known there was poison. He had been a man going out like a banked fire, courteous and dry and finished, and had thought that not minding was wisdom. He saw now that it had only been another kind of being got at slowly. It was the gravedigger's daughter who had unmade his peace with dying, and she had done it not with tenderness, of which she had a rationed and unsentimental supply, but with sheer affront, with the flat, outrageous refusal to let a perfectly good murder proceed on schedule. And he found, turning it over in the long clear nights, that a life saved by a person's affront rather than their pity is a life one is somehow obliged to do something with. He examined the feeling from several angles, the way he examined everything, being a man whose one vanity was that he weighed before he spoke. It was not gratitude, though it had gratitude in it. It was not desire alone, though God knew. Watching her hands, it had that. It was, he decided, the particular helpless regard of a man who has been shown, late and in extremity, exactly one person in the world who will tell him the truth at cost to herself, and who cannot now imagine the rest of a life, however long she had bought him, spent out of the sound of her voice. That was love, he supposed, stripped of the poetry he had never had patience for. It was also, he noted with his usual dryness, extremely inconvenient, since the object of it was a bought servant who could not choose him freely while she stood in his debt for her bread, and a man cannot in decency ask a woman to love him across a ledger in which he owns the entry. So he sent for his solicitor. He told her of it on the last morning of the year, in the long gallery where he was walking again, a little on her arm, up and down under the painted Dukes of Corvinwood in their frames. He stopped before the last empty space on the wall where his own portrait would one day hang, and he said, not looking at her, in the dry, flat voice he used for the truest things, "I have made a settlement. This week. With Blackwood, my solicitor, a dry stick of a man, you will like him. He has never in his life said a warm word, and every cold one has been true. It is a jointure. It is irrevocable. I've made very sure of the irrevocable. I've made Blackwood say it to me 4 times in 4 different ways, until even I could not find the door out of it. It settles on you, Mercy Winslow. An income and a house and your freedom, whatever becomes of me. If I mend, you are a woman of means, and may leave this house of murderers whenever the fancy takes you, owing me nothing, and I will hand you into the carriage myself. If I die after all, and I may yet, poison is a patient creature, and I have swallowed a great deal of it these 6 years for aught I know. You are provided for past the reach of my brother or any man alive, and you walk out of the assizes a free woman with the paper to prove I gave it you gladly, and in my right mind, on the last day of this year. He steadied himself on the rail. He turned then and looked at her, and the dry face was doing something it did not know how to do, something unpractised and painful. I have told myself it is a manumission, that I am only setting a bought servant at liberty, which is common justice and no more. That is a lie, and I find I am too tired and too lately spared to keep telling it. I am giving you the means to leave me because I have discovered that I want, past all sense and all fashion, for you to choose to stay, and a man cannot ask that of a woman he has bought. He can only unbuy her, and then stand in the cold gallery like a fool, having spent his whole principal on the one purchase that gives him no right to the thing he wants, and wait. That is a great many words, said Mercy Winslow, whose heart was going like the stable boy's 4 black-nailed fingers, for a man who prides himself on saying things plainly. Then I will say it plainly. He was very close. Stay. Say it plainer than that. And the Duke of Corvinwood, who had made his peace with dying and had it unmade for him by a gravedigger's daughter, said the plainest thing he knew, which was no word at all, and kissed her under the empty frame where his portrait would hang, and Mercy Winslow kissed him back, gravely and without embarrassment, and for the length of that kiss the tin with a dead man's name on it, waiting in its careful hand somewhere below them in the house, weighed nothing at all. She drew back first. She was always, all her life, the one who drew back first, because someone in a room has to keep the level thing from spilling, and it was as often as not her. You understand, she said, that this paper you have made me is the most dangerous thing in the house now, after the tin. A woman who has just been given a fortune stands very near a grave, if the man who gave it should chance to die untidily. I had thought of that, said the Duke. I had thought that if I died now they would say you had it done for the money. They will say it whether you die or not, said Mercy, but let them count. That is all I ask of any of them in the end. Let them count when the paper was signed, and count that it frees me whether you live or die, and then let them tell me what a woman gains by murdering a man who has already given her everything his death could give her. You are good at counting, your grace. When the hour comes that everyone in this county is shouting, I am going to need you to be the one man in it who counts. I will count, he said, not knowing yet what he was promising, nor how nearly he would break it. I am, if nothing else, a duke who counts. The hour came sooner than either of them looked for, on the 5th of January, which was Dr. Culpepper's first dinner in the house since the barring, arranged by Reeve, warmly, as a healing of an old wound, for it would not do, Reeve said, to have the county whisper that the family had cast off its faithful physician on the word of a workhouse girl. Far better to have the good doctor to dinner, and be seen at ease and let the strangeness die down. The Duke, who understood exactly what dinner it was, and let it come, because he and Mercy had agreed the trap must be sprung on ground they could see, sat at his own table for the first time in 2 months, and was gracious. Culpepper was gracious in return, and sorrowful, and benevolent, and across the cloth he asked Mercy gently, in front of 2 magistrates and their wives, about her late father's trade, so that the word resurrectionist fell a second time from a physician's kind mouth, and was filed away by people who would be asked, within the week, to remember hearing it. And after dinner, when the Duke had taken a caudle in the drawing-room, a posset sent up warm from the kitchen and set, for the length of a hand of cards, on a side table by the window, where any of a dozen sleeves might have passed above it, the Duke of Corvinwood was taken with the cramps again, doubled over the card table retching, his hands drawing up like a bird's feet, and the whole warm room turned to ice around him. The broth, said Dr. Culpepper, rising sorrowful and terrible from the Duke's side, wiping his soft hands. It is in what he has been fed. It has been in what he has been fed all along. I feared it. God forgive me. I feared it, and held my tongue, not wishing to accuse where I could not prove. But I will hold it no longer, not with his Grace's life again in the balance before all of you. Who has fed him? Who alone has drawn and carried and tasted every mouthful this man has swallowed these 2 months, and let no other soul near the tray? Who has kept him, gentlemen, from his own physician? He turned, slowly, with infinite sorrow, and every eye in the room turned with him, and they came to rest on Mercy Winslow standing white by the fire. Search her things, said the doctor gently, for his Grace's sake, for all our sakes. I pray to God we find nothing. They found the tin. It was Reeve who steered them to it, kindly, reluctantly, a brother forced to a dreadful duty, to the loft over the stable and the flat trunk with the churchyard smell, which was locked, which Mercy had kept, locked and empty, and had told no one was empty, so that its being locked now looked like guilt, and its being empty, when they broke it open, looked like a woman who had swept away the proof of a theft she now claimed. For the trunk, Forced held nothing at all. It was beneath the straw pallet where Mercy had never once slept, for she slept in the sick room, in the chair, and every servant in the house knew it, that the footman's hand closed on the little Japan tin and drew it up into the lantern light so the stamped letters caught. J. Thorne, Sexton, Ratsbane. The gravedigger's tin, under the gravedigger's daughter's own bed, with a dead man's name on the lid, and inside, when they pried it, the white powder, and a good third of it gone. I gathered it as proof, said Mercy, and heard how it sounded even as she said it, heard the ghoul's voice come out of her own mouth exactly as she had dreaded it would. It was stolen from my father's kit a fortnight since. I've known ever after it was in this house. I kept the trunk locked because it stood empty, and I did not want it known the tin was gone before I could find who had taken it. You kept the trunk locked, said Reeve softly, wonderingly, his handsome face a ruin of grief and disbelief. And empty, you say, and empty we find it, swept clean as a guilty conscience, while here is the tin snug beneath your own bed, and a third of the poison spent. And the room made the small collective sound that is the sound of a rope going taut. The Duke was carried up to his bed, grey and shrunk and half-conscious, and Mercy was kept below, and it was there, in the drawing-room, before they took her away, that the worst thing of the whole winter happened, worse than the rope. Sterling Halbrook, roused enough to be brought the tin and told where it was found and told a third of it was gone, looked at Mercy Winslow across the cold room with the tin in his own 2 hands, and for the length of one breath no more, but she counted it. She would count it for the rest of her life. She watched him doubt her. She watched the weighing intellect she loved him for turn its cold fair scale on her, and find, for that one breath, that the pan with the tin in it hung lower. He was poisoned and exhausted, and had just been doubled over his own card table in front of the county. He was a man who had that hour been taught again, in his own belly, that someone in his house wanted him dead. And the tin was real, and it was hers, and it had been drawn from beneath her own bed, and a third of it was gone. She saw the doubt land. It was the plainest and cruelest thing anyone had ever shown her, and she did not weep, because weeping was a thing you did when there was time, and she did not think there was going to be time. "Ask me nothing more tonight, your grace," she said, in the flat voice with her chin up. "You are not fit to weigh it, and I am not fit to bear your weighing it wrong. Lock me up. It is where a Winslow ends, and I always half knew it. But when you are clear-headed, and you will be, it is the one thing in you they cannot poison. Count. Count the days. Count when the doses fell, and where you were, and whose hand was near the cup each time, and count them against the days you took nothing but from me and were well. Count when the paper was signed that frees me living or dead, and count what a woman gains by murdering the man who has already given her everything his death could give. You promised me you would be the one man in this county who counts. I hold you to it. I do not ask you to believe me. A thing believed under asking is not worth the breath. I ask you only to do the sum, alone, in the dark, where no one is shouting. That is all. That is the whole of what I have left to give you, and it is more than most are given, for most are only shouted at." They locked her in the old strong room, a windowless stone box off the cellar stair where the plate had used to be kept. For her own protection, said the doctor, from a household that might grow rough with a poisoner. And Mercy Winslow sat down on the cold flags in the dark and put her back to the stone, and did the one thing she had not let herself do since the churchyard, which was to be afraid all the way to the bottom of it, quietly, so that no one would hear, until she had used the fear up and could stand on the floor of it and think again. There was Mrs. Tilbrook, though. They kept Mercy in that stone box the better part of a month, waiting on Candlemas as a butcher waits on a market day, and through the long weeks of it the housekeeper came when she could and dared in the deep of the night, and on the night that Candlemas stood but 4 days off she came with a candle and a covered basket that held more than comfort, and she shut the door behind her and set the candle down and looked at Mercy a long moment in the wavering light, and then she got down, stiffly, her 40 years cracking in her knees, and sat on the cold flags beside the gravedigger's daughter she had sworn she did not like. "I have poured that man his physic for 40 years, she said low, "and I smelled a coal over your shoulder that told me 40 years of it was a lie, and I have not been able to unsmell it since. I do not think you did this. I think a great deal worse of who did than I dare say aloud in this house tonight." She opened the basket. Inside, wrapped in a cloth, stood 3 things: a stoppered bottle of the broth she had drawn off the very day they took Mercy, before ever it went near the drawing-room, the amber tonic glass from the last of the doctor's own visits, unwashed, its dregs gone to sludge, and, in a twist of paper, a little of the white powder from the tin, scraped before the men carried it off. "I sealed what I could," said Mrs. Tilbrook, "with my own wax and my own thumb ring pressed in it, and I have written on each where I had it and the day, and I will swear it before the magistrate himself and before God after him, that no hand but mine has touched them since. I do not know what good it does. I am a housekeeper, but I have kept this house's things safe for 40 years, and I am not going to stop with the one thing that matters." She looked at Mercy. "There is to be a gathering. All Souls is long past, but his grace has let it be given out. There will be a great company here at Candlemas, for the churching of his recovery, half the county and the magistrate Sir Fabian Wardley with them. That is a slow, hard man, but no fool. And Mr. Reeve means to have you handed to the constable quiet. before the guests, so it is all decided and mannerly and no one has to look at it too near. I heard him arrange it with the doctor through a door. A grim breath. I tell you so, you will not walk into it blind. You have 4 days. I do not know what a gravedigger's daughter does with 4 days in a sealed bottle. But you are cleverer than me, and you are cleverer than them, though you have been too proud and too frightened to let anyone see the whole of it, which I will say to you now because there may not be another hour to say it in. Let them see the whole of it, girl. Stop keeping it in the dark like your father kept the dead. Bring it up into the light, where the county can smell it. It is the only trade you have that they will believe. Above her, 3 floors up, in the great bed under the carved posts, the Duke of Corvinwood lay grey and clearing, and counted. He had told them to think him sinking, and they thought him sinking, and it suited him for once to be underestimated, for a man believed to be dying is a man left alone with his thoughts, and his thoughts were the only weapon they had not been able to take from him. So he lay through the long night and the clearing day, and he counted in the dry, pitiless voice he kept for himself. He counted the doses. He set them out on the counterpane of his own memory like a hand of cards, and turned each one face up. The cramps of the 4th of December, the night Culpeper doubled the dose and administered it with his own hand. The cramps of tonight, the 5th of January, after Culpeper had dined, and a posset had stood by the window within reach of the whole company, and against these he set the whole clear fortnight in between, and the fortnight before that, when the doctor had been barred beyond the door and Mercy alone had drawn and tasted every mouthful, and he had mended, honestly ounce by ounce, blotch by blotch, with no cramp in him at all. The poison fell where the doctor was. It fell nowhere that Mercy was alone. That was not a feeling. That was a column of dates, and it added only one way. He counted the tin, found beneath her own pallet in the loft, a 3rd spent, with her dead father's name stamped plain on the lid. But a woman who meant murder does not lay the poison under her own bed with her own father's name punched into it, to be turned up by the first search. She keeps it nowhere, or she keeps it where it can never be traced to her, and above all she does not label her own guilt in the ironmonger's letters and lie down to sleep above it. It was a thing left to be found. He had handled enough evidence in his life as a magistrate's neighbour to know the difference between a thing hidden and a thing planted, and this had the smell of the second. And he counted, last, the paper, the irrevocable jointure, signed and sealed on the last day of December in his own right mind before witnesses, 5 days before the tin was found, freeing her whether he lived or died. He made himself think it through as his brother would have him think it, that she had wormed the fortune out of a dying fool and then hastened the dying, and he could not make it stand, for the plainest reason in the world, the reason she herself had handed him in the gallery and in the drawing-room both. The paper freed her living or dead, so that his death bought her nothing. His life had not already bought her, and no creature murders for a coin already in its own hand. It did not add. It would not add however he turned it. The only sum that added was the sum she had begged him to do, and he had done it, and it came out against every man in his house but the one woman they had locked in the cellar, and he lay back on the bolster and was ashamed, not with the hot shame that excuses itself, but with the cold, particular shame of a man who prides himself on weighing true and had, for the space of one breath, in terror, with the poison in his own belly, let the scale be nudged by a tin. He had promised her he would count. He had counted, and the counting told him that Mercy Winslow had never once lied to him, that his brother Reeve and his physician Ivo meant to hang her at Candlemas to close the account clean and quiet, and that he was going to have to let them think him still the sinking, doubting, 3 parts dead fool they needed him to be, right up until the hour they spent him, so that they would spend themselves along with him, in front of the whole county and the slow hard just eyes of Sir Fabian Wardley. He sent Mrs. Tilbrook one line folded small and burned her answer. Let them think me sinking still. On the day, get her into the hall, not the yard. Tell her 3 words, I did the sum, and send to the town for Blackwood, and tell him to bring everything he can buy or swear out of the apothecary Mullins, and every note of my brother's debts he can lay a dry hand on, and to say nothing to any living soul, on his oath as the driest man in England. They brought Mercy up into the great hall at Candlemas, in the grey light of 2 in the afternoon, between 2 footmen, before the assembled county, and the thing was arranged, as Reeve loved to arrange things, to look like Mercy. There would be no ugliness. The poor mad ghoul would be handed quietly to the constable, the family spared a scene, the guests folded back into their wine and their whist with a delicious shudder to carry home. Reeve stood by the great fire and played the room the very picture of a brother bearing up under a horror, handsome and grave in his mourning dark coat, and Dr. Culpeper kept close at his shoulder with his hands folded on his belly. They had carried the Duke of Corvinwood down among his guests, and set him in a tall chair by the hearth heaped with rugs, propped and grey, his head lolling and his eyes half shut, a man too far gone, they all supposed, to follow the formality got up around him. Off to one side, Sir Fabian Wardley, the magistrate, had drawn a hard chair apart and settled unhurried into it, watching everything from under heavy lids, with the patience of a man who has learned that the truth, like a boil, comes up in its own time if you do not lance it too soon. It is a grievous business, Reeve began softly to the room, and I had prayed to spare us all the telling of it. Then do not spare it, said Mercy Winslow loudly, and the whole hall turned. She had come in white and steady, and she did not mean to be handed to any constable in any corner. Do not hand me away in a doorway, Mr. Halbrook, like a housemaid caught with the spoons, with everyone's back half turned so it need never quite have happened. You have called me poisoner. Call it here. Call it out loud, before Sir Fabian and the county and God, and let it be answered here, out loud, where you started it. For you started it on a gallery stair with a rumour about my dead father, and I will not have the end of it whispered when the beginning of it was so carefully spoken. I am the gravedigger's daughter. I have spent my life at the open grave, and I will tell you what my father told me, that the thing done in the dark and buried quick is the thing that keeps and rots the ground it lies in for years. Bring it up into the light. I will be tried in the light or not at all. There was a silence. Sir Fabian Wardley shifted in his hard chair and said, in a slow, dry voice not unlike the Duke's own, "The woman asks to be heard openly. It costs the law nothing to hear a thing openly, and it has hanged a deal of innocent folk by hearing them in corners. I am here. I may as well earn my dinner. Speak your charge, Mr. Halbrook, aloud. And you, Doctor, aloud. I have all the afternoon and a hard chair to keep me honest." So Culpepper spoke it aloud, and he was very good. Mercy would give him that to the end of her life. He was suave and sorrowful and sure, and he built his gallows stone on stone. He laid out the broth that only she had drawn. He laid out the 2 relapses, the 4th of December and the 5th of January, and did not say, because he did not need to, that on both those days he had been in the house. He laid out the tin with the dead man's name stamped on the lid, drawn from beneath her own pallet before witnesses, a third of its poison spent. He laid out, with exquisite reluctance, the county's word for her father. Resurrectionist, body snatcher, a keeper of corpses too fresh. And the cold logic that such a trade breeds such a hand. And he had, he said, a servant, poor frightened Suki, the housemaid, who had come to him in tears of her own accord, and would swear she had seen Mercy Winslow at the broth pot with a paper of white powder in her fingers. He turned to where Suki Cole stood white and shaking at the edge of the crowd, and said, gently, terribly, "Tell them, child. Only tell them what you saw." "Suki," said Mercy, before the girl could speak, and her voice was not the flat expert voice now, but something lower and almost kind. "Suki Cole, look at me, and not at him. You are going to say a thing that hangs me, and you are going to have to carry it, alone, in the dark, for the rest of your life, the way I have carried my father's name. I will not stop you. I only ask you to wait, and to say it in a place I mean to take us all to, with the truth open in front of you, and if you can say it there, over what is there, then say it, and I will go to the constable without another word. Sir Fabian, there is a proof in this house that no coach servant and no stamped tin, and no dead man's bad name can argue with, and it can be tested this hour. The old Duke, his Grace's father, was physicked into the family vault 6 winters ago by that same Dr. Culpepper, of a wasting decline, and the doctor wept at the graveside, which his Grace remembers because he had never before seen the man weep. He lies below the chapel now, 6 years down. My father taught me that a man carried off slow by the white powder does not rot honest in the ground. He keeps. The arsenic stays in the flesh and holds off the corruption that takes an honest corpse, so that the poisoned lie fair and fresh and known, long past their season. Open the vault, open the old Duke's coffin, before all of you, before the parson who keeps the keys, and if his father died as God takes men, you will find 6 years' honest work of the grave, and you may hang me this afternoon, and I will not say another word, nor need you gag me. But if you find him lying fair and unrotted and kept, then you will know there has been a poisoner in this house not 6 weeks, but 6 years, and it is not the girl who came in a cart at Martinmas. I am the gravedigger's daughter. I will open the coffin with my own hands. Will the good doctor come down and watch me do it? The hall had gone perfectly still, and into that stillness Dr. Ivo Culpepper made his single mistake, the one mistake of a very careful man, which was that his smooth face for a quarter of a second was not smooth. Mercy saw it. Sir Fabian Wardley, who had hanged a deal of men and learned in the doing of it to watch a face at exactly such a moment, saw it too, and his heavy lids came up and stayed up. "The vault," said Sir Fabian slowly, "will be opened. Reverend Colley keeps the keys, I think, and buried the old Duke himself. Reverend Hosea Colley, the parson, a careful, honest, unshakable old man who had buried 3 generations of Corvinwood and would not be hurried by any of them, rose from his place and said that he did indeed keep the keys, and that he had never in 50 years refused a lawful opening, and that he would refuse this one only over his own grave. And they went down, all of them, the whole shuddering, delighted, terrified county, trooping down the chapel stair, with lanterns into the cold under the house, and Reeve Halbrook went with them because he could not go, for a brother who bolts from his own father's coffin has confessed, and Dr. Culpepper went because a man who runs has hanged himself in the running, and the Duke of Corvinwood was carried down in his chair among them, his head lolling, his eyes half shut, watching everything from under his lashes and saying nothing at all. The vault was cold and dry and smelled of stone and old dust and the iron of the coffin fittings. Reverend Colley found the old Duke's coffin in its stone niche and read the plate aloud, the name and the date 6 years gone, so there could be no mistake made afterward of which man they had raised. Sir Fabian nodded, once, slow, and Mercy Winslow took the iron bar that the sexton's daughter knew exactly how to set and wear, and she looked once at the Duke in his chair, and the Duke's half-shut eyes opened just to her, and he gave her the ghost of the knife laugh with them, and she set the bar and opened the old Duke's coffin before the whole county of his birth. He lay fair. 6 years in the ground, and he lay fair, the flesh kept, the face known and quiet, no honest corruption on him at all, waxen and even and preserved, exactly as the farmer of Ackley had lain, exactly as her father had taught her. A poisoned man lies when the ground gives him back too kind. A woman screamed softly once, and stopped with her glove against her mouth. Reverend Colley took off his hat, and stood bareheaded over the man he had buried, and did not think had needed his prayers hastening. And Sir Fabian Wardley looked a long time down into the coffin of a duke 6 years dead and lying like a man a month gone, and then he lifted his heavy eyes and turned them, slow and terrible and entirely just, upon the physician who had signed that man into the earth. "Dr. Culpepper," said Sir Fabian, "you attended this death, you certified it. A wasting, you wrote, I have no doubt." "Arsenic," said Mercy quietly, into the cold of the vault, "keeps a man. It cannot help itself. It is the one honest thing about it. It cannot lie in the ground, whatever lies were told over it. Suki." She turned in the lantern light to the little maid pressed shaking against the stone. "Say it now. Here, over him. You saw me at the broth pot with the white powder in my hand. Say it again now, with the old Duke's kept face open to the lantern, and God in this cold room and no door for it to be whispered through. Say it to him." And Suki Cole, who was frightened but was not, in the end, a liar, who had been threatened into her lie and could not carry it down the chapel stair and lay it over a 6 years dead man lying like a Sunday buried one, broke and put her apron to her face and said, sobbing, that she had seen no such thing. God forgive her. She had seen no such thing at all, that the doctor had given her the words to say, and Mr. Reeve had given her a crown, and told her she would lose her place, and worse, that he would see her whole family turned off the estate to starve, if she did not swear them, and that it was Mr. Reeve had brought her the little tin wrapped in his own handkerchief, and stood over her while she carried it up to the loft and pushed it under the pallet, with her own 2 hands, 3 nights ago, and told her to say nothing, and it would go easy for her, and that she was sorry, she was only a poor girl and afraid, and she would say the truth of it now to any judge in England and be hanged herself, before she said the other thing again. The vault made no sound at all. Then Reeve Halbrook laughed, easily, warmly, the sound absurd and horrible against the stone, and said what a monstrous confusion this all was, a hysterical maid, and a graveyard conjuring trick, and a corpse that had dried, as corpses will dry, in a dry cold vault, and that he for one would not stand another moment in this charnel cold to be. "Mr. Blackwood," said the Duke of Corvinwood. His head was not lolling any more. He sat up in his carried chair in the lantern light, grey, still and thin still, but clear-eyed and upright and terrible, and he had not been 3 parts dead at all, not for many days, and every man in that vault who had spent him for a used coin understood in the same cold instant that he had been counting them the whole way down the stair. Out of the shadow by the vault door, where he had come down quiet among the servants, stepped a dry stick of a man in a black coat, the solicitor Blackwood, who had never said a warm word in his life and did not begin now. He opened a leather folder against the lantern. "At his Grace's instruction," he said, in a voice like a drawer sliding shut, "I have this fortnight examined certain accounts. Mr. Reeve Halbrook's debts stand at £11,000, secured every farthing against his expectation of this estate, and called in by his creditors at the New Year past, an expectation worth precisely nothing while his Grace draws breath, and worth the whole of Corvinwood the hour his Grace stops. Further," he turned a leaf, "at his Grace's instruction, I have this week purchased of the apothecary Mullins in the town, and hold here under Mullins' own hand, and the doctor's own signature in Mullins' daybook, the record of Dr. Ivo Culpepper's purchases of white arsenic across these 6 years, a quantity, gentlemen, that no honest practice among the living could account for, the graves of this parish being what they are, and the last purchase of it entered 8 days ago, which is to say 5 days before a certain tin was pushed under a certain pallet 3 nights past." He closed the folder. "The dates are all in order, and all in agreement. His Grace, I am given to understand, is fond of dates." "I am," said the Duke. "I have had a great deal of time flat on my back these 2 months to grow fond of them, having little else to count. Sir Fabian, you have a corpse that will not rot, a maid that will not after all lie, an apothecary's book that will not explain itself, and a brother who owes £11,000 against nothing in this world but my breathing. I believe that is what the assizes call a weight of evidence, and I believe every stone of it was quarried and set by the woman my brother's doctor would have hanged this afternoon in a doorway to save the trouble of looking at her." His clear eyes moved without haste over Culpepper's grey face, and over Reeve's, which had stopped being handsome, and came to rest last and longest on Mercy Winslow, who stood by the open coffin with the iron bar still in her hand, and her father's whole disreputable trade stood up and vindicated in the lantern light around her. "I doubted you," he said to her, before them all in the flat plain voice, "for the length of one breath on the worst night of your life, when you had earned better of me, and I have spent every night since counting my way back to you, and I find the sum comes out the same however I turn it, that there is exactly one person in my house who has told me the truth at cost to herself, and I have been standing in her debt so long, I forgot a man may pay a debt by asking to be allowed to owe it forever. He held out his thin hand to her across the cold and the dust and the kept and patient dead. "Mercy Winslow, gravedigger's daughter, come out of that grave and be my wife and my duchess, and say it plainly if the answer is no, for I have had, this winter, my entire lifetime's fill of things left in the dark." "I will have you," said Mercy Winslow plainly, and she set down the iron bar and took his hand. Sir Fabian Wardley took the doctor and the brother before the company left the vault, which is a thing that had never before happened in that vault and has not since, an arrest made over an open coffin, and the county spoke of it for a generation. And what the assizes drew out of the two of them afterward, each buying himself a day by naming the other, closed the last dark corner of it, that 6 winters gone the old duke had begun to squint at his physician's long bills and his longer physic, and had died of the squinting, fair and kept. That Reeve Halbrook, a green youth then but a watchful one, had guessed the how of his father's easy passing, and hoarded the guess like a coin against a rainy year, and that he had spent it at last from a hired room on the coast, sending word to Culpeper by a trusted hand to begin on Stirling in the autumn, before ever the creditors closed at the new year, and while Reeve himself stayed 100 miles off, to be seen by all the world to be 100 miles off when the wasting took hold. The doctor had poisoned first to save his own throat, and after for Reeve's promised gold. Reeve had never once held the spoon and had meant never to, which was the whole of his cleverness, and in the end, none of his defence. Ivo Culpeper was tried at the spring assizes at the county town on the evidence of a corpse that would not rot, an apothecary's daybook, a housekeeper's sealed and thumb-marked bottles that reeked of garlic over the court's own coal, exactly as they had reeked for Mercy in the still-room, a maid's confession, and a column of dates in a dead fond duke's own hand, and the same county that had come to shudder deliciously at the Candlemas gathering came now to watch him hang, which he did, on a bright cold morning in April, protesting to the last in his sorrowful benevolent voice that he had only ever meant a kindness, that the old and the wasting were a weight upon their houses, that no one had truly grieved, and no one truly would. He was wrong about the grieving, as the wicked often are, for Reverend Colley grieved the old duke freshly all over again, 6 years late, over the grave he had thought at peace. Reeve Halbrook was not hanged, for the law could prove that he had bought the maid and owed the debts and carried the tin in his own handkerchief, but could not quite prove that his own hand had ever held the spoon having always been the doctor's, and there are things a duke will do to keep his own father's name off a second gallows and his own blood out of the hangman's cart, even for a brother who has earned both. Stirling gave him a knight and a fast horse, and a sum that was charity and not affection, and the plain understanding that if Reeve were ever again seen within the 4 seas of England, his brother's mercy would run out with that day's dawn, and the whole of Blackwood's folder would go to the crown. He took the horse and the knight, and went abroad to the continent, and the county closed over the place where he had been the way ground closes over anything left long enough, and within a 12-month no one at Corvinwood said his name, and within 2 the children did not know they had ever had an uncle, which was, the Duke said once and only once, the nearest thing to a grave he could give a living man. Suki Cole kept her place, for the Duke said that a girl frightened into a lie who untells it in a cold vault, with the truth lying open against her, has more plain courage in her than half the brave gentlemen he had dined with, and Mercy said the same, and meant it harder, and the 2 of them between them saw the girl safely and decently married, 3 years on to a steady man of the estate, and stood up at the churching of her first child. Mrs. Tilbrook kept her keys and her 40 years and her stern, watchful heart, and if she never quite brought herself to say aloud that she had come to love the gravedigger's daughter she had sworn she did not like, she pressed her thumb ring into the sealing wax of the new duchess's letters ever after with a particular grim satisfaction, and Mercy had learned by then to read the woman's grudged approvals the way one reads weather, and took each withheld gesture for the whole warm speech it stood in the place of. Tom Reed, whose foresaved fingers had been the making of Mercy in the house before ever she was made in it by anything grander, grew up straight and red-headed and clever with his hands, and was prenticed to the estate's mason at the Duke's charge, and it was Tom, in the end, grown to a young man with a chisel of his own, who cut the new gateposts for the thing the Duchess set her heart on first, and would not be talked out of. For Mercy Winslow, being now the Duchess of Corvinwood with means and rank, and a husband who deferred to her flatly and openly on all matters of life and death, and would tell any marquess who raised a brow that his wife knew more of both than the College of Physicians, and had the graves to prove it. Mercy did the one thing the county least expected, and never entirely got over, which was that she went down into the parish and put her father's burial ground to rights. It had gone to nettles and slump and rat in the 3 weeks between the old sexton's death and the ground's forgetting of him. The pauper's rows lay unmarked, the coffin boards were gnawed, the wall was down in 2 places, and the new sexton, an idle man, let the dead lie as carelessly as the living had let her father lie. The Duchess came down in a plain stout gown with her father's ledger under her arm, and set it all to rights with her own hands, and the Duke's whole purse behind them. She walked the poor rows and named them from the ledger, where the new man had left them nameless. She had Tom Reed cut clean stones for the ones that had gone under with none, so that no soul in that ground, however poor, should keep the anonymity that the poison had so nearly kept for the old Duke. She mended the wall and hung a new gate on Tom's posts, and put down the rats honestly, with honest ratsbane bought openly in the town under her own name and entered in her own book, for a thing done in the light is a different thing entirely from the same thing done in the dark. as she had cause to know better than any woman in England, and she kept the ledger her father had kept, in his hand, and then in her own. Every parish soul entered fair and plain and legible, the christened and the churched and the buried, kept up in the light where a name can be read, not down in the dark where it will only keep and rot the ground it lies in. Reverend Colley, who had opened the vault, consecrated the mended ground on a green morning in May, and said in his careful, unshakable voice that in 50 years of burying he had never known the dead of this parish so well served nor so honestly kept, and Mercy took that, from that one honest old man, as the finest word ever said over any work of hers. The Duke worked beside her, which astonished the county more than the hanging and the exile and all the rest of it together. A peer of the realm in his shirt-sleeves in a pauper's churchyard with a barrow. But Sterling Halbrook had been given his life back out of the ground by a woman who dealt in graves, and had lost, somewhere in the cold of his own family vault, whatever fastidiousness he had been born with about the business of the dead. He carried stone for Tom to cut. He held the ledger open to the light, while she read the rose and corrected the new sexton's idle hand. He learned, badly and entirely on purpose, the names of the churchyard weeds, so that she would have to correct him, because he had discovered early in their marriage that she called his errors the death of her in a particular dry, flat voice he had come to prize above music, and provoking that voice had become, in the plain economy of the two of them, a coin he spent freely and often, being a man who had at last learned the price of everything and chosen, having been so near to losing all of it, to be prodigal with the one currency that had turned out to matter. They had a daughter within the first year, and a son the year after, and the Duke, holding the girl at the font while Reverend Colley named her, leaned to his wife and observed in the dry voice that no longer troubled to hide a thing from her, that he supposed the child would grow up unfashionably well acquainted with churchyards and coffin plates, and the smell of a coal held to a glass, and that he found, to his own considerable surprise, that he could not think of a sounder education for anyone born to money and rank, since the whole of his own had come to him too late, and by way of a coffin, and had cost a good man 6 years in the ground before anyone thought to smell him. And Mercy said that a child raised to know that the dead must be served in the light, and the living fed from a watched cup, would do well enough in any weather the world sent, and that she meant to raise both of them, Duke's children though they were, to weed their own row and read their own ledger, and take no man's grief on trust without they had first done the sum, which became, first in the family and then in the whole house and then in the mended parish beyond it, a saying, "Weed your own row," meaning tend the near and honest thing that is yours to tend, keep your own accounts straight and open, and let the county talk itself hoarse. On a long gold evening at the end of that first mended summer, the burial ground set fair and the new stones pale and clean and legible in the grass, and the wall standing whole, Mercy sat with her husband on the low coping by the lich gate, with the day's ledger closed on her knee and the last of the light going level and warm across the rows her father had dug and she had named. The daughter was asleep against the Duke's coat. Somewhere in the dusk a churchyard rat went about its old immemorial business among the sound coffins, and the Duke observed dryly that for all her arts and all her honest ratsbane the rats endured, and Mercy said that the rats always endured, that this was rather the whole point and purpose of ratsbane and always had been, and they were both quiet a while with the old dark Japan tin between them in the memory, and neither of them afraid of it any longer, nor of the man who had carried it in his handkerchief, nor of the man who had wept at a graveside and hanged for it. Then she opened the ledger a last time in the failing light, and entered the day, and the fair weather, and that the ground of the parish stood whole and its dead all named in her father's careful hand that had become, without her ever quite marking the hour of it, her own, and she closed the book for the night. And the gravedigger's daughter and the Duke of Corvinwood sat together on the churchyard wall in the last of the gold with their sleeping child between them, among the honest, well-served, unhurried, openly kept dead, and were, in the plainest possible fashion and entirely in the light, content.